Unconstitutional political prosecutions. Failed security at political events. A coup against the President of the United States. Media dishonesty. Government harassment. Economic chaos. And a border security crisis. All over the United States, people are waking up to a harsh truth. And it's worse than you think. Hi guys, Jason Bodine coming at you from Gadsden, Alabama. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're a returning visitor, welcome back to my channel. I don't usually cover politics on this channel because ever since I decided to get serious about making videos about 4 years ago, I've always been about being both fun and informative while at the same time promoting discussion through the free exchange of ideas. But since that last one seems to be under attack now, not only from forces within our country, but from other nations who seem to have forgotten that the United States is in fact a sovereign nation, and since our own government's current administration is too busy acting like they're having the world's biggest going out of business sale to set those other countries straight on the point, here we are. Now, a lot of you won't be surprised by what I said in that opening slideshow after watching Kamala Harris's economic plans unfold yesterday. But if you watched it and you came out of it thinking, oh, come on, Jason, stop spreading conspiracy theories. It's not communism. I don't blame you. Because what's going on here is not your great-granddaddy's communism. And it happened so slowly and one piece at a time that it slipped under the radars of even the people who should have seen the warning signs. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video today. If it's not your great-granddaddy's communism, then what is it? Well, the short answer is that it is something that was born from flipping the most vile and shameful policy in United States history, after slavery, of course, Jim Crow, on its head and marrying it to the most oppressive form of government ever conceived in world history, communism. It's something that I call identity communism, which you'll see why as we get on into the video. For the longer answer, we're going to need to look at both of these things, Jim Crow and communism. We are going to have to make comparisons to our modern situation in this country, and we're going to have to look at the timeline to see exactly how we got here. Now, trigger warning. Some of you are not going to like that part at all. Okay, guys, you've been warned. Let's continue. In order to show you how identity communism evolved in the 21st century United States, I first need to give you a proper introduction to its progenitors, Jim Crow and communism, and that presents me with a bit of a problem for both subjects, in that with Jim Crow, the source materials, language, and imagery are such that even though they are presented in a historical context, it could be taken by the YouTube algorithm as inappropriate content. And in the case of communism, it has such a long history and there are so many flavors of it that I just can't possibly cover it all in one video. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to give you a brief summary of each subject, Jim Crow and communism, and I'm going to leave you links to the source material in the comments. And in the meantime, I want you to think about how these things might be related to today's politics. Jim Crow was the name of a racial caste system that operated mainly, but not exclusively, in the southern and border states of the United States from 1877 through the mid-1960s. More than just a racist set of laws and social etiquette designed to keep African Americans segregated and at the bottom of the social ladder, it was a way of life that permeated every single aspect and educational level of society in these areas. Often, acts of racial violence were used in furtherance of this goal. Churches and schools taught it. Politicians legislated it. The police enforced it. Courts defended it, and the media used racially charged pejorative language in reference to African Americans. Now, the Jim Crow Museum has a whole list of beliefs associated with Jim Crow and some other information that I wanted to be able to share with you, but I'm afraid to because I might violate YouTube's community standards that tell you all about it, and I encourage you to go to that website or to go there and visit. They do have a physical location. They are run by Ferris State University in Michigan. But here are some things that you won't find on the website because they are exclusively dedicated to what went on in the United States. Number one, Jim Crow was just one of several such systems based on the idea of racial superiority that existed in the world until well into the 20th century and some even later on into today. This is what led to the persecution of Jews in Europe and the Middle East, and to Japan's invasion of Manchuria, all of that leading into World War II. Now, another thing you need to know, guys, is a lot of that stuff that had to do with civil rights because of Jim Crow happened right here in Alabama in places like Birmingham and Selma. But because of that, a lot of people, not just around the world, but right here in the United States, seem to think that's still going on right here in Alabama. And I am here to tell you, no, it is not. So put that out of your brains right now. Somebody even tried to use that crap to justify it several years ago in the comments of a HuffPost article I saw on Facebook about some African American woman who said her life had been made easier ever since she banned white people from coming into her business. And in my comments, I said that that was segregation, that it was illegal, and somebody tried to justify it by saying something was still going on in Alabama. And let me tell you, I set them straight on that right away. So, yeah, that stuff's not happening here anymore. And this is what went on. So, now, let's move on to communism. For communism, we turn to the Encyclopedia Britannica's entry on the subject, which tells us that communism is a political and economic system first conceived of by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, which seeks to pit the lower classes of society against the ruling class in a violent revolution in order to overthrow capitalism and democracy in favor of a classless society in which private property is abolished and all resources and means of production and distribution are owned communally by the people. Marx's theory is driven by three main concepts: a materialist conception of history, a critique of capitalism, and the revolutionary overthrow of capitalism with its eventual replacement by communism. Now, when Vladimir Lenin led the Bolsheviks to victory in rebellion against the Russian Tsar in 1917, he installed a form of communism known as Marxism-Leninism that made two major changes to Marx's original ideology and became the basis for the form of communism most people are familiar with today. The first was that revolution could not happen spontaneously, but had to be guided and tightly controlled by the Communist Party because the people could not be trusted to govern themselves. The second was that communist revolution could only begin in economically backwards countries such as his own Russia. Now, when Stalin came to power, he brought with him the form of communism which would dominate the Soviet Union for the rest of its existence and become the basis for all future communist regimes in the world. Stalin's form of communism added two additional ideas to Lenin's. The first being the cult of personality, which was the idea that the Communist Party itself could not be trusted to govern and must be guided by a single all-wise leader. The second was the concept of socialism in one country, which entailed developing the military and industrial might of one country before exporting the revolution abroad. This form of communism and its derivatives in other countries are characterized by collectivization of agriculture, rapid industrialization, forced labor, indoctrination, and political show trials. Now, a few more things about communism before I take you even further down the rabbit hole. Now, disclaimer. Some of this stuff can be found in that Britannica article. Some of it is historical stuff about communism that is not found in the Britannica article, and the rest of it is me speculating using logic based on the known factors. So, number one, materialism under Marx meant historical materialism, meaning that history is moved by class struggles and focused on material production. After Marx's death, Engels modified it to philosophical materialism, the doctrine that only the physical world is real. This is why religion of any kind, not just Christianity, is suppressed in communist countries. The reason for this change wasn't made clear by the Britannica article, but I suspect the real reason can best be summed up by Gomorrah from The Never-Ending Story.
Because people who have no hopes are easy to control, and whoever has the control has the power.
2. Tight control means that in communist countries, all resources are owned and or regulated by the governments, as is every aspect of citizens' lives. This led to the collectivization of agriculture in Russia and such things as the regulation of how many children a family could have in China. Again, I can find no reason for the latter, but I suspect it's because these governments know that communism doesn't work with large populations. The more people you have, the less wealth there is to distribute. Tight control also means that not only was the government in a communist country spying on its citizens, but in some places, such as China and East Germany, the government had citizens spying on each other. And 3, collectivization of agriculture in many communist countries, including the Soviet Union, led to shortages and black markets. This led to price-fixing policies much like the one Kamala Harris is proposing, which only led to more shortages and black markets. In the Soviet Union, these two things fed on each other until they became major factors in the ultimate downfall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Right now, your wheels are spinning. just like mine did when I started doing my research after hearing Kamala Harris's price-fixing policy. Now that you know what Jim Crow and communism are, your mind is racing to connections to United States politics in 2024, whether or not you want it to. Some of you watching have already made those connections, and for some of you, it's a very uncomfortable feeling. You may not like it. You may not agree with it. You may even be trying to justify it. But your mind is moving in that direction. You're seeing the relationship of the Jim Crow culture of the 1960s to anti-whiteism today. You're seeing a link between Kamala Harris's price-fixing policy and the failed economic policies of the former Soviet Union. You're connecting Tim Walz's COVID snitch line to East Germany and the emphasis on science, redefining of terms, and rewriting of textbooks to Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China. You're seeing possible motives for the Democrats' support of abortion and transgender issues that have nothing to do with the rights of women and transgendered people, and you're seeing it all through a lens grounded in knowledge of history, not forged in the fires of rhetoric and conspiracy theory. You've taken that first leap following the white rabbit down the rabbit hole, but we're still on our way down and have a ways to go before we reach Wonderland. Are you ready, Alice? Those are just a few examples of hints that these two oppressive ideologies have crept their way into official United States policy in 2024. And there are a whole lot of other ones, such as Sunny Hostin of The View unironically using Jim Crow's one-drop rule to justify calling Trump racist for questioning Kamala Harris's heritage, or Harris's Medicare for All and statements about taking over patents, both smacking of communism, in that they both involve collectivization of private industries, or, perhaps most telling of all, the language used by the Democratic nominee and her running mate themselves.
One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
We believe in the collective.
You'll be forgiven if your mind went here instead of here on that last clip. They're basically the same thing, except that the Borg are a lot more efficient at being mindless drones without individual needs, since they don't need to pay bills, raise kids, or, eat. But it's not until you look at the timeline of events leading up to this point that you see how these two ideologies were combined into a new form of communism, identity communism, and spread so slowly and completely throughout American culture and politics that it slipped under the radars of even people who should have seen the warning signs. That is, of course, unless they're ignoring it in order to push an agenda. People like this man right here, whom many of you will recognize as actor Misha Collins from the hit TV show Supernatural. Now, I know what a lot of people are saying, that they're tired of actors sticking their nose in politics, but as it turns out, Misha Collins is in a unique position to know better than the rest of them, and yet he is still pushing Kamala Harris for president. And I can only assume, since he is, from everything I know about him, a genuinely kind, caring, and intelligent human being, that it is the former rather than the latter that is keeping him there. You see, Misha is uniquely qualified in that he was not only in politics before becoming an actor, and also the fact that he is 50 years old. He is less than a month younger than me. He's 50 years old, and his given family surname is Khrushchev. Those two things together mean that there is a better than 99% chance that even if you take Misha Collins at his word that family name goes back 6 generations into Canada and they don't know where it came from, there is a better than 99% chance that whoever that mystery relative is that came over was fleeing communism. I set out here with the goal of helping voters make an informed choice through data analysis rather than attempting to persuade with wild conspiracy theories. I started with a descriptive analysis of Jim Crow and communism that includes Lenin's recipe for inciting and spreading the latter. Then I gave you an exploratory data analysis comparing the policies of the current Democratic Party nominee and her running mate to those ideologies. Now, let's use mechanistic analysis to break down the timeline of events leading up to her nomination to show how the Democratic Party combined these two ideologies into a new form of communism and used Lenin's recipe to introduce it to the American people unawares. Identity communism is a form of communism based on the protected classes defined by the 14th Amendment rather than economic classes as in traditional communism. It was formed by flipping the Jim Crow ideology on its head in terms of who is attacked and who benefits from it, and combining it with Marxist-Leninist communism. Whether it was the intent of the Democratic Party from the start or just something they latched on to and capitalized on to gain popularity and power is open to debate. But there is no question that the rise of this hybrid ideology was, following Lenin's formula, a long, slow, guided process. It took 16 years to get to the point it's at today and can be divided into 3 time periods: the Obama presidency, the Trump presidency, and the Biden presidency. A lot of people don't like hearing negative things about President Barack Obama, but it was during his tenure as President of the United States that the foundations for what would become identity communism were first laid down. It began early in his first term when Obama showed his first leanings towards authoritarian socialism with his renewal of the warrantless NSA wiretapping policies of the previous administration that violated the Fourth Amendment rights of millions of Americans and were exposed by former intelligence operative Edward Snowden in 2012, and with the introduction of the Affordable Care Act, which made it mandatory for all Americans to have health insurance, be it from a private company or from the government-subsidized insurance created by the Act, and penalized people heavily on their taxes with a hefty fine if they did not have insurance, regardless of the reason. Now, it could have ended there, but when Trayvon Martin died in 2012, his death became the catalyst for anti-white sentiments in the United States, which would very quickly be taken up by the Democratic Party and evolve into an inverted Jim Crow culture and set of policies. The following year, in 2013, Black Lives Matter was founded in response to Martin's death, and Oprah Winfrey infamously went on the air and said, "Old white men need to die." And the left adopted the doctrine of white privilege and used it to redefine the word racism to include power and privilege in addition to prejudice. A year later, in 2014, Black Lives Matter coined the term woke in relation to the plight of African Americans. This, in turn, led to talk of reparations and the practice of anti-white segregation, such as what the subject matter of the HuffPost article I alluded to earlier was about, and black students in colleges and universities demanding no whites allowed areas. Meanwhile, anyone who spoke up against these anti-white sentiments and segregation were censored by being labeled racist or pro-white supremacy, regardless of the race of the person speaking. All of these factors together, Obama's quasi-socialist policies, the anti-white sentiments sparked in the wake of Trayvon Martin's death, and the censorship of those who spoke up against those sentiments had the cumulative effect of setting up white people as a ruling class to be reviled and rebelled against, thus creating the first variable in Lenin's equation for the rise of communism. The widely unexpected victory of Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election staggered, but didn't stop, the further development and evolution of identity communism. In fact, the Democratic Party was emboldened, both during the election and in the years of Trump's tenure in office. They billed themselves as a party of revolutionary change. doubled down on socialism with Bernie Sanders' campaign promoting an even more aggressive form than Obama's, which he called democratic socialism, used tactics similar to those of a mafia crime family to rig the DNC primary against Sanders so Hillary Clinton would get the nomination, co-opted the hashtag #MeToo movement, and used both Clinton's candidacy and the movement to expand their definition of the ruling class from white people to white people and men, in order to spread the ideology to a whole new demographic, feminists. Hillary Clinton failed to win the White House, but by the end of Donald Trump's term in 2020 and the beginning of Joe Biden's bid for the presidency, the COVID-19 pandemic had struck, and the Democrats worked overtime to further develop this hybrid ideology and expand it to as many people as possible to ensure their candidate won. The definition of woke was expanded beyond race and gender to include all the protected classes defined by the 14th Amendment, and, as Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg recently revealed, managed to censor information about the pandemic and about Hunter Biden's laptop well enough to win Biden the election. It was also during this period that another aspect of communism, looking to the future by focusing on science above all else, came into play. In regards to both climate change and the pandemic, the American public was told to trust the science, and people who elected to do their own research were mocked in the form of memes, many of which are still floating around today. This naturally sent a mixed message to the American people. On the one hand, that you should trust the experts, and on the other, let us do the thinking for you. Don't try to educate yourself because you're not smart enough. With all of that, the stage was now set to usher in the next phase in the evolution of identity communism. Of course, Trayvon Martin's death and the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic were events that couldn't be anticipated. But by the election of Joe Biden in 2020, it's clear that the radical left had taken complete control of the Democratic Party and were by then fully committed to the ushering in of a form of communism based on protected classes rather than economics, what I call identity communism. Just as they latched on to the former to get the ball rolling, they latched on to the latter to accelerate this goal towards completion. The current phase of the Democratic Party's identity communism ideology could easily be divided into two parts, each with its own set of events, the Biden presidency and the Harris campaign. But since Joe Biden is still technically the President of the United States and the goals of this current phase seem to be the same, it's really the same phase in two parts. The first part of this timeline, or this time period rather, saw the development of the third and fourth variables in Lenin's equation for communism, an economically backward nation and a violent revolution. This was when the extended shutdown of the economy and massive government overspending brought on by the COVID-19 mandates in 2020 led to the loss of millions of jobs, the closing down of small businesses across the country, and massive inflation in the prices of energy, groceries, and other goods and services. That same year, 2020, violent revolution came in the form of the peaceful BLM protests. Much like the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 Russia, this did not have the world-shattering or even nation-changing effect the Democrats hoped for. It did, however, embolden them enough that they didn't bother to hide this agenda anymore. The evidence for this in the first part of this time period can be found at both the federal and state levels This includes Tim Walz's Stasi-esque snitch line during the COVID-19 pandemic, His refusal to either call in the National Guard for 3 days or allow the police to help anyone who wasn't a member of the protected class during the BLM riots in Minnesota, and Kamala Harris's support for bailing out the rioters, defunding the police, and decriminalizing border crossings, all of which only served to weaken the economy even further, while at the same time bringing in undocumented migrants as a whole new disenfranchised class for the Democrats to champion for. In the second part of this time period, the evidence is seen in the rewriting of textbooks to include critical race theory, the ramping up of DEI programs in multiple social and professional institutions nationwide, making abortion an election issue to bring in the support of more women following the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the weaponization of the media and both the civil and criminal justice systems against political opponents such as Donald Trump, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard, the undemocratic coup against Joe Biden and subsequent coronation of Kamala Harris as the 2024 Democratic presidential nominee, the latter of whom not only picked Tim Walz, who has actual ties to Communist China, as her running mate, and has announced actual communist economic proposals in her bid for the presidency, but is using the Jim Crow tactics of focusing on their candidates' race and gender and segregation to raise money for her campaign, with events such as White Women for Harris and White Dudes for Harris. Not to mention Harris's "I can see what can be, unburdened by what has been" mantra, and her claims of flipping on several key positions while somehow not changing her values. One should not be fooled by either of these tactics, though. Though it is often mocked as one of her famous word salads, she is actually stating that she is a communist with that statement, as it is merely a rewording of the communist philosophy of only looking forward with no regard to where you've been. And while there are those who claim that she has abandoned her old positions for a more moderate stance, this too is a tried and true communist tactic. Fidel Castro used it quite effectively during his rise to power in Cuba. In order to keep the United States from intervening in his transition to power, he swore up and down that he was not a communist and would hold free elections in Cuba. This, of course, is not what happened. The moment he came to power, he declared himself a communist, began the collectivization of private businesses, and closed Cuba's borders to Americans. It's easy to see from everything we've examined how and when identity communism developed in the United States from Jim Crow and Communism. What may be obvious to some and not so obvious to others is just how that hybrid ideology slipped into American culture and politics under the noses of people who should have seen the warning signs, such as the aforementioned Misha Collins, or anyone who either lived through the civil rights movement of the 1960s or has a relative who did. The answer to that question is that it uses a very clever and therefore very dangerous strategy that employs three key factors: time, emotion, and sleight of hand. In terms of a human lifespan, 16 years is a long time. Plenty enough to, as the Democratic Party has done, develop an ideology and disseminate it so slowly into every aspect of society, saturating the media, social media, the entertainment industry, the educational system, and the legal system, until people are surrounded by it 24 hours a day, being conditioned by it whether they know it or not. It's much like the old adage about a frog in a pot of water. If you put it in boiling water, it'll jump to safety. But if you raise the heat slowly, the frog won't notice until it's too late. The promoters of identity communism use the very insidious tactic of wrapping up their ideology in genuine issues like climate change, LGBTQ plus rights, and women's rights, and creating a scapegoat for the cause of those problems in order to draw people to its cause by playing on their emotions, most notably anger, pride, empathy, and revenge. First, it plays on the empathy of people who care about those issues. It then plays on pride, not individual pride, but group pride, to make people think they are part of a group that is somehow owed something without necessarily having to earn it. It then points the finger at a group, in this case white people and men, that it claims is responsible for their mistreatment in order to incite anger and a lust for revenge against that group. The result, of course, is what we've seen develop in the political on the political left over the last 16 years. People who are whipped into the mob mentality of communism, in which they are more concerned with what their group deserves than with the individual rights and freedoms of all Americans. Yet, because Jim Crow is also part of its lineage, it's not one mob but a multitude, each with its own interests. Every good stage magician knows that the key to a successful illusion is to keep the audience focused on one hand so they don't notice what the other is doing. Such is also the case with totalitarian ideologies like identity communism. Policies are enacted and issues raised that are ostensibly for the betterment of one or more groups, and the Democrats hope the people only see that and not the smoke and mirrors operating the illusion. I didn't cover them in detail for the sake of time, but diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs, the hashtag #MeToo movement, and the abortion issue are all prime examples of this. DEI, for instance, creates the illusion by focusing people on its supposed intent to level the educational and professional playing fields for minorities, while diverting attention away from the fact that it does this not by creating enough opportunities for everyone of any race, gender, or orientation, but by decreasing the number of opportunities available to white people, straight people, and men. Likewise, the hashtag #MeToo movement and the abortion issue keep attention focused on women's rights while diverting it from the fact that they do so by relegating men to the status of second-class citizens and trampling upon what little rights they have in a system that was already stacked against them even before the overturn of Roe v. Wade. The latter is also part of a secondary illusion in which the Democrats hope to attract women to the cause of identity communism by making abortion an election issue while hoping they'll ignore the political reality that even if it passes through both houses of Congress, any attempt to codify Roe v. Wade into law will not likely survive the scrutiny of the Supreme Court. Now, I have videos on men's rights and the abortion issue, which you are free to check out. I will put links to them in the end card of this video if you want more information. When you put those three things together, it's really no surprise that people like Misha Collins missed it. And if you missed it, it's no surprise that you did either. Because when you disseminate a harmful ideology over a period of years, present it in a way that even the most compassionate and caring and intelligent people on earth feel good about themselves for supporting it, and make sure that they only see the upside of it and never the downside, of course you're going to miss it. So if this is the first time with me telling you this, that you are thinking about Kamala Harris and the Democrats in these terms, don't feel bad. You don't have to be a Democrat or a Kamala supporter to have missed this. I myself missed it at first. Now, I've never been a big Kamala Harris fan or a fan of the Democrats. Quite frankly, I've always thought that they were a bunch of race-baiting hypocrites at the best of times. But even I did not make that communism connection until Kamala Harris gave her price-fixing economic policy and then picked Tim Walz, of all people, as her running mate to be vice president. That is what prompted me to do the research that led me into doing this deep dive that you've been watching. So, as I said, don't feel bad. Wow. I just added up the total runtime of all the segments of this video, and I didn't realize how long that it really was. So I think here's a good place to stop. I've given you all the information that you need to go to the voting booth in November and make an informed decision. Now it's up to you, America, to decide whether or not you want to buy what the Democrats are selling. Now, so I'm going to let you go, but before I do, a couple of quick thoughts. One, you may have noticed that I covered the Democrats here, but not the Republicans. That's because while the Republicans aren't perfect, nothing about them that I've seen suggests that they are anything other than what you see is what you get. They've been pretty transparent, love them or hate them. Whereas the Democrats have, especially the last few months, been about as transparent as a concrete block. So that's the reason for that. Okay, and two, please don't forget to like this video, comment, and share the video, and to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. Alright, so I guess that's it, guys. Until next time, peace.